It was one of those ordinary nights, nothing special. The day had been exhausting, so I lay in bed without thinking about anything but sleep. I remember feeling the fatigue taking over me, my eyes closing heavily. The room was dark, and the only thing I could hear was the soft sound of my own breathing. But something happened. I can't say exactly when. I just know I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling, as if I was being watched. My eyelids opened slowly, heavy, as if something was holding them shut. I tried to move my arms, my legs. Nothing. I was completely paralyzed, unable to move even a finger. The feeling of helplessness washed over me, and a deep terror began to spread through my body. And that's when I saw him. There, standing at the foot of my bed, he was. A tall, thin man, and the most striking feature, the hat. It was a wide-brimmed hat, partially covering his face, which was submerged in shadows. I couldn't make out the details of his face, but I knew he was looking directly at me. His eyes, oh, those eyes, they were like two black holes, full of malice, glowing in a deep red, as if they were burning coals from hell. My mind desperately tried to find a rational explanation, but my body was trapped, paralyzed, powerless. I wanted to scream, beg for help, but my voice was stuck, suffocated inside me. The only thing I could do was watch, horrified, as he stood there motionless, staring at me. There was no sound, not a breath, not a step, just absolute silence, as if the entire world had stopped at that moment. He began to move. His steps were slow, but there was something wrong. His movements were not normal. It was as if he were gliding, as if his feet barely touched the ground. Each inch that he approached made the air in the room feel heavier, making it even harder for me to breathe. When he reached the side of my bed, I felt a chill run through every inch of my body. I could feel his presence, the malevolent energy that radiated from his figure. He slowly bent down, and his face drew closer to mine. The faint light coming through the window outlined his silhouette, but his face remained in the shadows. I tried to look away, but it was impossible. His eyes glowed even more intensely, as if they were absorbing all the light from the room. He was so close that I could feel his breath, cold and repugnant, like it came from something that had been dead for a long time. Suddenly, he smiled, and that's when my heart almost stopped. That smile. It was too wide, unnatural, as if his mouth were opening in an impossible way. There were no teeth, just an infinite darkness inside that mouth. A buzzing sound began to fill my ears, like the sound of 1,000 voices whispering all at once, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. His smile seemed to widen with every second, as if he were savoring my despair. I tried with all my strength to move a muscle, anything, but my body felt trapped in a deep abyss. And then he did something I will never forget. Slowly, he extended his hand toward me. That hand, it was skeletal, bony, with fingers that were too long, with sharp nails that gleamed in the faint light of the room. He ran his hand across my face, and the sensation was like ice burning my skin. Every point of contact felt like it was burning and freezing at the same time, as if I were being marked by something far beyond human. His touch seemed to steal the warmth from my body, leaving me colder and colder. His hand moved down my neck, and I felt my lungs tighten. He was suffocating me without even applying force. Just his presence was enough to make me lose control of my own breathing. My vision began to blur, while his deformed smile continued to widen. I knew that if I didn't wake up soon, he would take me somewhere I'd never return from. At that moment, without warning, he leaned in even closer, his lips almost touching my ears. His voice, low and distorted, sounded like a muffled thunder in my mind. "I'll be back," and then he simply disappeared. There was no movement, no sound. In the blink of an eye, he was no longer there. When I finally managed to move, the terror was still thick in the air. My heart was beating so fast I thought it was going to explode. I looked around the room, searching for any sign that he had actually been there. There was nothing, but the fear persisted. I knew that somehow he hadn't completely left. He was lurking, waiting for the right moment to return. Since that night, sleeping has never been the same. Every time I close my eyes, I'm afraid that when I wake up, the man in the hat will be there, watching me again, ready to take me to wherever it is he came from. The most terrifying thing? I know he's coming back. I've always been skeptical when it came to the supernatural. Ghosts, demons, those things never really scared me. Until that night. It was late, and I had already been asleep for a few hours. Fatigue had overtaken me quickly, and soon I was in the deepest of sleeps. But suddenly I woke up. The silence of the night filled my ears, a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the sound of my own breathing. The first thing I noticed was the intense darkness in the room, dense, almost palpable, much darker than usual. I tried to move, but I couldn't. It was as if something invisible was holding me down, pinning my limbs to the bed. I couldn't even move a finger. A sense of despair began to grow inside me. At that moment, I didn't know what was happening, only that I was completely helpless. And then, I felt it. I didn't hear anything. There wasn't a single sound to alert me, but I felt it. Presence. It wasn't just a feeling. It was something very real, as if someone was in the room with me. My entire body went cold. I couldn't see what was around me, but I knew I was no longer alone. The air in the room seemed to change. It was denser, heavier, almost suffocating. My breathing, which had been soft before, was now ragged and short. That's when my eyes, almost involuntarily, moved toward the corner of the room, and there he was. A tall, thin figure, draped in a black cloak, standing near the door. The darkness around it seemed even deeper, as if it were absorbing any trace of light in the room. I couldn't clearly see its face, just a vaguely human silhouette, but I knew it was looking at me. In that instant, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. The cold invaded my body like a sharp blade, and with each passing second, I felt more fear. Something about that figure was wrong. It wasn't just a shadow. It was something far more sinister, something that didn't belong to this world. It began to move, slowly, with a terrifying calm. It slid across the floor toward me, without making a sound. Its steps were so silent they seemed non-existent. Every inch it approached made my heart beat faster. My throat seemed to close. The paralysis kept me from doing anything but watching, powerless, as it got closer and closer to my bed. When it finally stopped beside my motionless body, the terror I felt reached a new level. It was so close that I could feel the weight of its presence as a physical pressure on my chest. My breathing was almost non-existent, and every attempt to draw air seemed in vain. Then suddenly it leaned over me. I couldn't see it fully. Its face was hidden by shadows, but I knew it was watching me with sick attention. I could feel its eyes, though I couldn't see them, that made me want to scream. But my voice was trapped, suffocated by fear and paralysis. All I could do was stare at that dark void just inches from my face. What came next was even worse. Slowly, a hand emerged from the darkness. It was pale, almost translucent, with long, bony fingers that seemed to belong to a decaying corpse. The nails were long, pointed, like claws ready to tear flesh. It extended that hand toward me, and when its fingers touched my arm, I felt the absolute cold. It wasn't just the cold of a chilly night. It was the kind of cold that seemed to steal the very life from my body. Its hand closed around my arm, squeezing with a strength that didn't seem human. It was a grip that burned and froze at the same time, as if I was being marked by something that shouldn't exist. The pain started to grow, radiating through my body, but still, I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I was at the mercy of that thing. The silence in the room became unbearable, the heavy breathing of that being the only sound breaking the deadly stillness of the night. Suddenly, it began to whisper. At first, it was a barely audible sound, a faint buzzing that seemed to come from inside my own head. But the whisper grew louder, as if it were getting closer, more insistent. I couldn't understand the words, but the malice in the voice was clear. It wasn't there by accident. It was choosing me. I was the victim of something I couldn't comprehend, something that was there to destroy me, to consume me. His hand slowly began to move up, sliding from my arm to my neck. When its icy fingers closed around my throat, I knew the end was near. It didn't need to squeeze hard for me to feel the pressure increasing, the pain exploding in my chest as the air disappeared. My heart was beating out of control, and I knew that if I didn't wake up soon, that visitor of the night would take me to a dark place from which I would never return. At that moment, without any warning, it leaned its head closer to my face. Its lips were so close that I could feel its cold, rotten breath, like it came from an open grave. And then it spoke. Its voice was low, distorted, as if it came from another world. "You're mine now," it said, in a whisper that reverberated inside me, echoing in my mind like the sound of an endless nightmare. And then, just as it had appeared, it was gone. There was no transition, no movement. In the blink of an eye, the room was empty. I still couldn't move, but the weight of its presence was gone. When I finally regained control of my body, I sat up in bed, gasping for air, trying to calm my pounding heart. But something was wrong. The air was still cold, and the feeling that something terrible had happened continued to suffocate me. I knew, in that moment, that it wasn't over. It hadn't truly left. It was just waiting, lurking, like a shadow hidden in the corner of the room. Since that night, I've never been the same. Every time I close my eyes, I'm afraid it will come back, that its whisper will return. Because deep down, I know it will come back. The visitor of the night never leaves for good. I've always been a skeptic. I've always considered myself a rational person, someone who sought logical explanations for any strange things that happened around me. But that night showed me that real fear doesn't need an explanation. It just settles in, consumes you from the inside out, until nothing is left but the certainty that something far beyond our comprehension exists. Something evil. It was an ordinary night. I had gone to bed late, exhausted after a long day of work. Sleep came easily, as it always did. But suddenly I woke up. It wasn't a normal awakening. My body was stiff, motionless, and the first thing I noticed was the absolute silence in the room. The silence wasn't normal. It was heavy, suffocating, as if the very air had been drained from the room. That's when I realized something was very wrong. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My hands, my legs, all stuck, as if my body had been glued to the mattress. My heart started beating faster as panic grew inside me. My eyes darted from side to side, desperately trying to find an explanation. That's when I saw it, or rather I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow on the ceiling, a dark smudge that seemed formless. Something that, at first glance, I could have dismissed as a trick of my still groggy mind. But the feeling that came with it, the feeling of being watched, hunted, was very real. The shadow was on the ceiling, motionless. The darkness around it seemed denser, heavier than the rest of the room, as if it was sucking up all the light and life around it. I wanted to look away, but something inside me forced me to keep looking at it. Then it began to move, not in the way you'd expect something human to move. It slid across the ceiling, like a stain of ink spreading on paper, fluid and unsettling. My breath caught in my chest as it slid toward the walls, closer and closer to the bed. The sound of my heart was the only thing I could hear, pounding so hard I feared it might explode. When the shadow finally began to crawl down the walls, a wave of icy terror washed over my body. It descended slowly, unhurried, as if savoring every second of my fear. The room seemed to grow colder with each moment. I tried to scream, but it was impossible. My mouth wouldn't obey. The paralysis was absolute, leaving me completely at the mercy of this thing that was approaching. Now it was on the floor, and then, slowly, it began to crawl toward me. I could see, or at least imagine, the shape of arms and legs, but everything was distorted, as if it didn't follow the normal laws of physics. The movements were disjointed, erratic, like a corpse that had been ripped from the grave and forced to move again. It was just inches from the bed. Every second felt like an eternity, as if time itself had been warped by this malevolent presence. When the shadow reached the side of the bed, it stopped. The silhouette rose, contorting in impossible ways. It was like a human figure, but it wasn't human. I couldn't see a face, but I knew with absolute certainty that it was watching me. It not only knew I was there, but was feeding off my terror. It was as if the thing was reveling in every drop of fear that dripped from my skin. Then, slowly, the shadow leaned over me. I felt the pressure of its presence like a physical force pressing down on my chest, making it even harder to breathe. The dark shape began to descend over me, covering my body like a shroud. It was impossible to look away. The shadow was so close now that I could feel the cold radiating from it. A supernatural cold, a chill that no winter could ever produce. Suddenly, it began to whisper. At first, it was a low sound, almost imperceptible, like a breeze passing through a crack in a door. But soon, the whispers became clearer and I understood. They weren't human words. They were distorted sounds, as if the very language was being corrupted. I couldn't understand what it was saying, but the meaning was clear. It was here for me. It was as if it was promising me something, an end. And I knew that if it touched me, it would be my end. There would be no return. The paralysis remained relentless, my mind trapped in a cycle of absolute terror. I tried to convince myself that it was just a nightmare, but the reality of that moment was impossible to ignore. Every second felt like an eternity, and the shadow remained there, motionless now, as if it was waiting for the exact moment to act. Then something changed. I felt a touch, icy, yet burning at the same time, something impossible to describe. The shadow had touched me. My skin burned with the contact, but it wasn't a physical pain. It was a pain in the soul, something that transcended the body. I knew in that instant that I had been marked, not by something human, but by something that should never have come into contact with this world. Something evil. At that moment, somehow, I managed to move. I don't know if it was the extreme fear that freed me, or if the shadow allowed me to move. But when I finally lifted my body from the bed, the shadow disappeared. Not like smoke dissipating. It simply ceased to exist, as if it had never been there. My body was covered in cold sweat. The room was still plunged into silence, but something had changed. I knew that somehow it was still there. Not physically, but its presence still permeated the room, like a lingering shadow that never truly leaves. Since then, the shadow has never appeared again. But every night, before I fall asleep, I feel as if it's lurking, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the exact moment to return. And deep down, I know it will come back,